Hi, thanks for tuning in to our Practical Nerds weekly podcast. I'm Shubh, and together with my partner and co host Patrick, we normally invest in founders in design, construction, renovation, and logistics technology. Many of our friends in the ecosystem wanted us to start a podcast on the built world, and in return, we decided to honor their request with a show about nothing at all. Hey Patrick, back again for another one on Practical Nerds. How have you been?
Hey, I'm doing great. I actually started a rerun of Seinfeld, must be my 10th rerun. And I actually yesterday arrived at the pitch to NBC about a show about nothing. So
Nice,
very
nice.
timely.
Do you think we are actually doing a good job emulating the example they set for us?
At least in terms of preparing nothing.
Oh man, I think if you're even in the same conversation, I'd be so proud.
Yeah, yeah. Well, who knows? Maybe NBC comes to us one day.
Yeah, for our little show about nothing. Every Friday, give or take, right? Or every Friday, out of three Fridays.
But then we have to find a Kramer.
I think we'll find one. I can think of one or two Kramers.
Okay, good. I'll follow up with you offline who that might be.
Nice.
Awesome.
Nice.
So yeah, what do we want to discuss today?
So two interesting topics on our hand. First one on the use of AI co-pilots and how they could be used in construction supply chains. Interesting topic. I mean, we've spoken quite a bit about construction supply chains on Practical Nerds. We've also spoken about AI in general, or spoken about AI in general. Interesting to see how those two may intersect in this discussion. The other interesting process, maybe look behind the curtain a little bit on how the VC process in general works. Some of our listeners and viewers may be familiar, some may not be as familiar, and how we believe we might be different. Obviously, also borrowing from what we have seen at our prior firms, other peers, etc. And I mean, not necessarily one approach is superior, or at least we think ours is superior, but we're biased. But interesting how that plays out in the dynamic.
And I think the latter part is especially interesting. So, of course, when you're raising for the first time, perhaps in your founder journey, I think then it's interesting. But even if you're like a serial founder who has done a lot of fundraising, some in our portfolio have actually raised north of 100 million. How is the process with someone that is a specialist in the construction tech vertical perhaps different from all the generalists that you talk to? I think even for a serial founder, sometimes the process in some regards can be simpler, in some regards can be different. So that'll be a good discussion, I think.
Absolutely.
Cool. So why don't we start with the, I call it procurement agents for, let's say, construction materials, I guess, in general, is that. So, in the 2 minutes briefing that you and I did with each other, we said, let's have a thesis discussion about this, because frankly, I don't know about you, but I think in Europe and the US, we haven't really seen a procurement agent to help, let's say, construction companies purchase materials more. Have you seen something like that? If yes, we should discuss that, because if not, then it should be a thesis discussion.
To be honest, nothing that is being of the markets that I cover and of the pitches made to me, nothing that is actually deployed and working at any scale, like not even at a scale of one client. In terms of ideas, yes, but not necessarily ideas that I have found myself being able to buy into.
Okay, got it. So then let's perhaps, if we make this a thesis discussion, perhaps first start a little bit with how the procurement process between a contractor and the supplier, that could be a distributor, wholesaler, or it could be directly from an original manufacturer. How is that procurement process typically looking in your region? And I can say it for my regions.
Sure. But by the way, just to clarify, I think I might have misunderstood your earlier question. My answer to your question was more on an AI procurement agent, for which my previous answer still stands.
Yeah.
If you're okay, now in the new question, if your question is on someone in between who sort of acts as, let's call it an orchestrator or a coordinator in the supply chain, I think that, I mean, the argument could be made that actually some of our portfolio firms fit that description. Not completely, but they do a few other things, as in they sort of push requests from the end customer to the manufacturer or work
Right.
with wholesalers, etc. Um,
Actually,
the re-
in a cross-border context. So I'm glad you clarify. I didn't even notice that I skipped the word AI. So this
Mhm,
is now a fascinating discussion. Actually, what does the
mhm.
agent look like without the AI?
Yeah,
In the cross-border context, actually, it's very normal. I mean, we call that importers
yeah,
exporters. Think
correct.
textile supply chains actually work a
Hmm.
lot with like agents in Asia or Turkey to
Yeah,
help you actually source, discover, negotiate, supply on a specific fabric or pattern. And I think in a construction cross-border context, that would also exist, like the human agent.
yeah. I mean, what I think also where we see dynamics involving procurement agents in a very traditional sense is categories with very intense fragmentation, as in there's not too many brands present in taking up large market share, and the supply is accounted for by a very fragmented base of suppliers. I think if these two come together, usually what you need to sort of make the supply chain function normally is these procurement agents
And I
who
would
will.
say that there's a third criterion is if you're um, the more custom or the more frequently you need something custom
Mhm.
manufactured, the value of the agent also typically increases
Agreed.
because then discovering your supply becomes all the more difficult because then it's about hey who actually has the capacity, who has the capabilities, the machine park, etc. to
Mhm.
do this specific custom request. So that's why it's so common, for example, in the textile chain is because every autumn and every spring,
Yeah,
my designers came up with a new design and need a new fabric and need a new pattern.
that's right. Yeah, I would agree with that. I think the use cases, the cross-border that you mentioned, as well as the highly fragmented, highly bespoke categories.
Right.
I think right now, most of the market across the world will have quite a few procurement agents actually smoothing the supply chain.
Okay, so that's like one aspect of how procurement works in that context, and then the more normal or the more regular construction procurement, more domestically, like how does it work in your part of the world without AI?
So without AI, there'll usually be someone, could be, you could call that person or that agency like a project manager or a contractor who would sort of take responsibility for the overall project. Uh, and then either they will have their own proprietary supply chains or sources of sourcing certain products from, or they'll then outsource specific products to different or different product categories to different vendors, suppliers, or manufacturers. The reason why I'm adding the caveat of vendors, suppliers, manufacturers, the larger and more influential you are in terms of either the project value or the contractor, the better is your ability, of course, to directly deal with the manufacturers.
Okay.
If that is not the case, the smaller you get in terms of size, the more the probability increases that you'll probably have to deal with a procurement agent, right? Who's probably dealing with someone else in the supply chain.
Okay. Got it. Got it. In my market, so let's talk mature markets, EU, US. Latin
Hmm.
America works a bit differently. Let's perhaps leave that aside for the moment. Um, you're seeing all forms of procurement being done. So there's really, to my own question, not a super generalizable answer. But let me give one common
Hmm.
approach among several approaches that you will find in the market. So if you're a mid-size to a large general contractor, oftentimes what you see is that they structure the categories that they buy in, for example, A, B, and C categories. So A
Hmm.
categories are steel, cement,
Yeah.
high volume, high masses, not necessarily a high um, value per ton, but
Hmm.
like high masses and large volumes
Yeah.
that you would need. B categories, floors, paints, things like that. And then C categories are the categories where you would have an extreme quantity, but very small parts and very small value per part. So that would be, for example, handheld power tools, fasteners,
Yeah.
etc. Right? So one common aspect that you see is structuring this by A, B, C categories. And then oftentimes what you will see is contractors saying, hey, for the A categories, if I'm sufficiently large enough, and as a mid-sized contractor, you would typically be, is you go straight to the source, like straight to the manufacturer. You would not purchase these very often through wholesalers or distributors. While the C categories, there are some brands in the C categories that actually go direct to contractor because they have established a certain brand reputation with the person on site that drills the fastener in the wall or uses a certain power tool. So that also exists in the C category. But you will also generally look for like replaceable alternatives, for example, cross-border. And it's the B categories where either you rely typically on distributors or because you try to save some money or get better access to inventory, where you try to build out new sources, could be cross-border, for example. And then the way you now purchase from these suppliers against these categories oftentimes would be that in an A category, you have a frame contract, and in a C category, not so much. Whereas in a B category, a lot of contractors are now trying to develop new sources of supply and then potentially doing frame contracts. Now, the problem is these frame contracts don't really help you with what's called maverick buying. So if you have a large organization that perhaps has 20, 50, 100 project sites ongoing at the same time, to your point, the project manager on site would still purchase the C categories.
Yeah.
And the A categories, she or he as the project manager would purchase against the frame contract if they are compliant. But if they say, hey, this frame contract is BS, the rates are not good, and what is my headquarter going to do? I might still go to my local guy or gal, and because I get a better price there, or the availability is better, that is super critical. So then I do some maverick buying. And so that makes this whole example that I'm giving is one of the common ways of procurement in the Western markets. And that makes it very difficult for example, procurement software or a marketplace to cover the entire, not just breadth of categories. That's difficult enough, but actually the breadth of processes, how purchasing today is being done. Very unstructured, very unmethodical, highly contextual, right? And so last point, Shub, and then I'll give the mic back to you. One thing that when we now switch to AI, so that was one piece of info. And the other is that think about this stat. So whenever you look deeper into the procurement in the construction supply chains, you will at some point stumble upon the question, why is so much being purchased offline versus online? So 90% of materials purchases still happen offline. Emails, fax, in-person, telephone. And 10% are online through the web shops of the manufacturers or the distributors. The common wisdom that you get from outsiders, let's say generalists, VCs, etc., when they hear this number is, construction, such a traditional industry, and people have not adopted online, etc. That's all BS. Has nothing to do with that. The reason why you have 10% of materials purchases only online is that it's a highly contextual sale. So you have you need to think of construction having tens of millions of SKUs, stock keeping units, variants of articles, basically, tens of millions. And it's much easier to articulate what you need in a quick semantic way to a person who understands what you're trying to achieve, the sales agent on the side of the manufacturer or the wholesaler. And so this contextualization between specifying what I try to achieve and understanding what you're trying to achieve and then matching that against tens of millions of SKUs in your catalog is much more efficient if you do it semantically than if you're trying to force people into a search mask on your web shop. So these are two pieces of information. And now against that, I don't know if that's similar in your markets. The question becomes, what can AI do?
Yeah. I mean,
that was a monologue. Sorry about that.
Oh, not at all, not at all. I mean, the interesting thing, right? I think just to peel the layers even further, if we go into do a root cause analysis, if you will, on I guess why all these things unravel the way they do. I think the other pet peeve with the construction industry is, hey, things end up taking so much longer than was originally budgeted for, and end up costing a lot more than was originally intended for. And I think sometimes there's this perception that, hey, this is, everyone's in on it and that's what everyone wants to do. That really isn't the case. I think there's so many moving parts. For example, things just get held up for permitting reasons, for example, right? And for that reason, you just can't start. So what do you do if you had decided to purchase some materials on a certain date, but there's nothing you can do to build the project because the permit hasn't come through, for example, right? So do you still go ahead with the purchase? Do you not go ahead? Do you then, find someone else, etc.? So this is where again, uh, someone or some sort of contextualization is needed, whether it's through a procurement agent or someone who has complete oversight of the whole thing
Right.
and is in a nimble enough situation to respond, etc. And as you may have figured, the more you have something start off with an initial delay, which forces a change or a choice in the beginning, that has a cascading effect on the schedule. Obviously, there's a lot of narrative on inflation and so on, right? So that kicks in more and more the longer or the deeper you go in the schedule. If there are components to be sourced cross-border, that has further cascading effect. So all
Right.
these things combine in a very chaotic way. Now, someone could look at it and say, hey, seems like there's 100 or 1,000 different variables. Seems like an interesting problem for AI to solve. Possibly, yes. I think my issue is I think AI is definitely a very potent tool to make sense of all these variables which are moving independent of each other. If each process always conducts its process or person or participant in the ecosystem conducts itself in a repeatable and predictable fashion. And I think that is where, for example, construction differs from the auto industry, for example, or most manufacturing functions where you can more or less predict with high certainty how an auto supply chain would function under certain constraints or variables.
Right.
In construction, the supply chain hasn't yet. So there's obviously a lot of participants taking the construction in that direction, but we have not yet reached that point where you can predictably say, if I subject a certain project or a certain set of orders to these constraints, this is what is going to happen. The supply chain hasn't matured to that degree.
And
I think that statement, sorry, and my last point, I think this statement is largely true wherever in the world we are. And in some parts of the world, it is so true that it is absolutely unpredictable, where you can literally repeat the whole thing and you'll get an entirely different outcome the next time.
and what you're describing even applies to like serial manufacturing supply chains. It's just that it's X times worse. So in serial manufacturing, in construction, X times worse. So in serial manufacturing industry, even supply chains, even there you have chaos, right? So I know an example and mind-blowing example, and there's examples like this every day across the world, where in an automotive supply chain that I'm familiar with, one tier one supplier that supplied a tier one automotive manufacturer, global brand, luxury cars. The tier one supplier was supposed to supply a critical engine part that was forged. And this engine part, unfortunately, from the plant that was supposed to deliver it on the continent that was supposed to deliver it, had a flooding in the plant.
Oh,
So the plant couldn't work. Now, this tier one manufacturer now had to get these things from the next plant across the border. And do you know how they actually, and again, this is against deep penalties if you don't
hmm,
deliver, right?
yeah.
This can ruin a business if you keep going for several weeks like that. They deliver it via helicopter.
Oh,
So
wow.
that screws your unit economics, right?
Hmm.
If you do that. But the point is, so you have these unforeseen circumstances in every supply chain of the world, like every day, all the time. So you're
Yeah.
scrambling, you're reacting to situations. It's just that that's the norm in
Hmm.
construction and so many variables. That's why contextualization in this, I guess there's the chaos element, but then there's also the number of SKUs. What do you want to do with it on site? Like all this adds to semantics being more efficient than like structuring it in your marketplace, structuring a taxonomy in your marketplace. And I guess that's where your and my AI thesis for this could kick in,
Hmm.
is what if the procurement manager gets a co-pilot that listens on the channels through which the communication happens semantically? That's email, that's WhatsApp, that's WeChat, that's text message. In some parts of the world, that might be faxes. I don't know how you listen to faxes, so let's exclude the faxes, and telephone. Okay.
Yeah.
And now with the semantic interpretation that LLMs today are absolutely able to do already, it becomes able to, out of all that listening, actually understand what is being asked. And if you feed it with your proprietary product catalog, right? I'm not saying do the product catalog open, public, or give it to a marketplace. So that's not what these manufacturers want in the first place anyway. But your proprietary catalog, if you feed that against that, you actually can automate a lot of that contextualization without giving it away to a marketplace, because it's still you're the distributor. Like, it's just you have automated part of your so on your side, it's the sales agent, and on the procurement side, the procurement manager has automated a lot of these requests for quotation.
But just to clarify, so you're saying you're automating certain aspects of the product features, how they fit in conjunction with certain orders, but not necessarily all aspects that go into making those products available. Because I imagine that would then need further integration of the data from the supply chain of that manufacturer.
Basically.
Whatever that manufacturer needs to do to ensure or guarantee that things will be delivered on demand to what is requested each time it is requested.
So, who knows? At some point, perhaps the distributor or manufacturer that becomes extremely comfortable with this agent system also is comfortable having it read his or her ERP system, the warehouse management system, etc. I don't think that's necessarily even required as a first step, though. So first of all, if you start this from the procurement side and you design this as a procurement agent rather than a sales agent for the manufacturer, the procurement agent would basically allow the procurement manager to feed it the frame contracts, to feed it past orders, perhaps that were done, and price lists. And then basically, instead of writing your emails and looking for suppliers, it would say, hey, please ask for a quotation from 20 different suppliers that can help me buy fasteners like this with these dimensions. Oh, actually, I'm getting WhatsApp. Why are we not doing a live event right now? Okay, so sorry, we are not doing live events anymore. Mo, sorry. But so basically, you would be asking as if you had like a procurement assistant in house, and you say, "Hey, can you get me like 30 RFQs for this?" And then the agent, the procurement agent, the AI procurement agent, would be able to send out a lot of emails or WhatsApps or WeChats, whatever whatever channel you currently use with your suppliers, and perhaps even tap into new suppliers because you're automating this. So I think that's a very simple, low friction way to start that would actually add a lot of value. Can you see that in your markets?
I could. I think what could be quite interesting, although I think the devil would truly be in the details on this one. I think we are seeing quite a few firms sort of rebuild the trusted supply chain layer, if I could call it that, in emerging markets. I could imagine either those firms or a new cohort of firms incorporate procurement agents either in these new age firms or like a layer which can be used by these new age supply chain firms as well as existing brands. As in, just to make myself more clear, there's a new age, there's newer supply chain firms, so trying to make construction supply chains more predictable or construction more predictable. So you then incorporate AI-enabled procurement agents on top of these firms to kind of piggyback off of their capabilities, if that makes sense.
Because they might be more tech adoptive? Is like that the reason why you're thinking of it that way?
More tech adopted, maybe more predictable than the regular construction supply chain.
I see. But for that, so what I'm hearing you say is that you say, hey, for these companies, you think this type of very simplistic automation of requesting proposals, like, am I hearing you say that could add value to them?
I think it could streamline certain aspects of what I think is generally conducted as project management, for example, in these firms. For example, I think what we have in some of our past discussions called outcome as a service or project management as a service. At this point in these companies, it's a very involved aspect to the business model. I can imagine something like a AI co-pilot or equivalent, uh, taking out, making it less operationally involved than it is today, reducing that operational involvement significantly,
Now,
possibly. Yeah.
now let me push the thesis, okay, and then hear what you
Hmm.
have, what you think in your context about this. So,
Hmm.
okay, so we've spoken about the automation of RFQs, okay, which in my markets, for example, would be quite valuable for B and C categories. For A categories, you will use a lot of frame contracts. So I think there, perhaps the ordering that you would typically even you would even do that via email. You can do, but
Hmm.
I think that's like a small fish of a value.
Yeah.
So let's move beyond these RFQs. Now you're getting all these quotations back. Where do you get them back? You get them back in email, in WhatsApp, in
Yeah.
WeChat. Everybody, it's like text and
Hmm.
paragraphs and bullets, etc. And now this poor procurement manager sits there and gets gray hair because, oh my God, how do I compare this? How
Yeah.
do I put this like next to each other? Everybody's using their own units. What if that's what the procurement agent does for you as well? Because it's all semantic information. That's all it is.
That could be quite powerful. That could be quite powerful. I think so. Are you describing like AI Copilot something which collates all of this together? But does it also go into then decide? Does it also make the ultimate decision?
Oh, ooh. I mean, if I was the business owner, I would feel uncomfortable with that
Yeah.
level of automation.
Yeah. I feel the same way. So I think in putting it all together in a very collated form, making sense of different formats, probably the person also gets long documents from its specific tables, specific numerical
Yeah.
information needs to be pulled out. In that, I think a AI Copilot functionality would be actually very handy. Uh, yeah, but it would have to stop short of decision making. It'll have to be like a comparison and summary tool, if I could call it that.
Right. Right. And basically running all that comparison and summary without even prompts, right? So the prompt
Hmm.
is collect RFQs,
Yeah.
and then it does this whole process. I mean,
Hmm.
in the RFQ process, then you get your responses. So first of all, you never, no, I should say never, but like you get responses where you have back and forth.
Yeah.
Like the supplier that you have sent RFQs, they might have a question back. So now the AI copilot should be in a way that to either answer that question
Hmm.
or elevate it in a dashboard type solution to me as the procurement manager, where it says, hey, here's the top 3 things where I need your attention right now. Please provide me a query or a response so that I can continue with this process. Okay, so now I work these tasks off,
Hmm.
and my copilot goes back running their process, meaning replies back to the supplier, etc. Okay, so now every supplier, perhaps I've done, my AI copilot has done the back and forth, etc. And now I'm getting actually PDF files with these
Hmm.
with these quotes, right? So the
Yeah.
PDF file could be the environmental product declaration, EPD. And now I, as the procurement manager, I would want to make sure that it meets the minimum criteria,
Yeah.
right? I'm getting
Yeah.
performance specs and spec sheets for the
Hmm.
products they're offering me. So I want to make sure that they're actually meeting the performance spec sheet. That's an awesomely automatable semantic
Hmm.
task, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think that could run quite far, actually. I'd have to agree with you there.
So in my market, I want to hear this from you. Like, what would be the best implementation of a technology like this in your markets? In my markets, um, probably the procurement teams and the contractors would be
Hmm.
the ones who would be my first choice of going to and trying to help them with a procurement AI agent like this.
Hmm.
There might be a case in my markets to also go from the other side and do it more as a sales
Hmm.
co-pilot, and I'm sure both systems will exist in parallel fairly quickly now. So you could
Hmm.
also go to the manufacturer and distributor doing it. I just think that it's more painful for the contractor than it is for the manufacturer. In your markets, like what would be the target customer for a service or system like this?
So I think procurement does make a lot of sense. I think also what we've discussed in the past and evaluated a few propositions, you combine this kind of assessment for all RFQs, procurement orders, etc., but also combine it with like a contract lifecycle solution, which constantly evaluates all the conditions being posed, both pre-acceptance as well as post-acceptance, and you convert that into a lifecycle solution. So in that, I think a co-pilot-like solution could be quite potent as like a ongoing source of productivity gain.
And would it be a procurement team in a contractor in your markets, or like what's your hypothesis? Who would be like the best customer for this?
So generally speaking, someone in the procurement team. I could imagine it would also take away resources from the legal side, depending on the market or how complex the project or the firm is. It could also take away resources or reduce resources from the function varies, but what is sometimes called reconciliation teams, like as in they compare the invoices, see what's actually been delivered, see if there's any mismatches, and use that to adjust actual payouts on an ongoing basis.
Okay, I see. All right. Well, look, I mean, we're not discussing this just for fun. It's actually, we're looking actively for a great team to build this. So if you know such a great team, then make sure they talk to us.
Absolutely.
So this time I'm the one doing the segue. It's usually you, but on the topic of talking to us.
Yes.
Yeah. Talk to me about the process. How do you deal with a VC? Like, what's the process like in general?
So I think in general, depends, of course, on how you end up interacting with the VC. It could be a combination or one of either you reach out to that particular VC or a VC professional, or you get introduced to them through someone you know, a fellow investor, an angel, another founder, or someone else in the ecosystem. Or maybe you sit back and they reach out to you for whatever reason, right? I mean, a subset of all these is stuff like meeting at events, crossing paths with them. You already know them, for example, from prior work.
At events, but yes.
Yes. Anyone but Patric, or even me, anyone but the two of us at events, right? And of course, if you are in a relatively small pool, you may already know a lot of VCs because of who you are or what you've been doing in the past. Right. Then from there, depending on the stage, the interaction, as well as how either geographically or sector-wise specific that firm is, you may run into a process which I don't think we see too many single-day process anymore with most funds. We used to see a whole lot of that a couple of years ago. Sorry, I just remembered an anecdote, but I think it's not meant for this discussion on some of the stuff that was going on 2 years ago, but we'll save that for some other time.
Hey, sorry, I before you go, I actually want to make a public service announcement. So you and I, we have agreed that around the holiday season this year, year end, we're actually going to take idioms from our mother tongues. And believe me, the German language has a ton of idioms. We're going to translate them into English, which is great fun in and of itself. And then we're going to say how that relates to VC and construction tech, each of those idioms. So just a public service announcement. That's going to be our episodes around the holiday season.
I think that's going to be the first episode of Practical Nerds where I'll actually come in very well prepared. On so many fronts.
Amazing. But sorry, I interrupted your...
Yeah. So again, depending on the stage, the space, the familiarity the firm has with the company and the space or the model, the process could last less than a week. Depends. We don't see that it happening that often in this year, but theoretically that could be the case. To up to a few weeks. If you're raising a large round, it could be several months, depending on how, depending on several factors actually, right? Along the way, you could expect to meet a few more, speak to either a few investment professionals in the team. In most firms, you probably have to pitch to the entire team at some point if you advance that deep in the process. Some may also expect you to pitch to a separate investment committee, which may or may not overlap with the investment professionals. You may also speak with some other third-party folks that they want you to speak to, etc. There may also be, if you're speaking with investment funds with very heavy sector leanings or strategic focus, you may have to speak with some strategic folks they're aligned with to establish some fit there, etc., etc. Right? And by the way, the reason I'm generalizing is the experiences also vary quite widely across geographies, right? So for certain geographies, it's also a case of trying to convince them about why a certain country or a certain sector. There may also be a process of educating them about the geographic market. That may also happen depending on who you are as a founder, where you're based, etc. So there's a sector education part, a model education part, but there might also be a geographic education aspect to it as well.
Perhaps before we come into like the differences, how it might be different raising from someone, like us that is more of a someone that spends more time vertically in a sector. Before we come there, perhaps it could also be useful to differentiate it, because you've hinted at it, right? So let's think in orders of magnitude. If I raise 1 million, if I raise 10 million, or if I raise 100 million, right? And so 1 million is like what, pre-seed or seed in our terminology. 10 million could be an A, could be a B round. And 100 million, unless you're building a foundational LLM, then that's your pre-seed with 100 million. Yeah. Usually that would be like a C, D, E, or later round, right? How is the process different across these different orders of magnitude?
In 2023 and in regular times, I presume. Yeah, that's your question.
Yes.
Okay. So in a pre-seed or seed stage, you'll probably interact, generally speaking, with fewer people. Could be as few as 1 or 2 people.
Okay.
The process could be as short as a few days. Again, might even be less than 24 hours, but generally speaking, could be as short as a few days. In current times, we see it usually lasts a few weeks. A round of 100 million, or let's say even if we bring it down to, let's say, anything over 40, 50 million right now, be prepared for a process which could take multiple months.
Right.
Things could also come together very effectively, and it could happen more organically, and therefore it's not very involved or very involved in an extrinsic sense. It may have been evolving intrinsically for a while, but extrinsically maybe it does not seem as long, but it could take a long time. Like I'm aware of firms from the wider market as well who've been in the market for quarters, long time, right? High quality companies, or what I would consider high quality companies, who've been very involved. And it's very interesting at several stages. You may feel like you're going up, advancing, or making progress, referring to the old 90s download progress bar. And then depending on who you're introduced to, what the set of questions are, it may feel like, hey, you're suddenly back to 50% progress or something like that. So even in that sense, it can be a bit odd in how things evolve. And in a weird way, it relates, I guess, to power structures at different VC firms, familiarity again with the business models. Generally, VC firms will be more comfortable taking bets they're not familiar with earlier stage. Again, generally speaking, they'll ask way more questions to do similar things as the check sizes get larger.
I guess another difference between, let's say, a 1 million round and a 100 million round is in a 100 million round. Again, I mean, we're joking about this, but actually there are 100 million rounds in like foundational AI with literally a slide deck, and the company was founded 3 days ago, like literally. Excluding that, usually the difference would be that in a 100 million round, you have to have your numbers perfect, and you need to show how from here on.
Oh, I'm glad you said that. I mean, one thing I'm seeing, at least in the markets I cover, I think we may be seeing more of it in the future in other markets. From a Series A onwards, say, give or take 10 million and higher.
Oh, I know what you're saying.
Yeah. High quality VC firms will insist on an audit being done.
Yes.
And on a sign off from what we refer to as Big 4 or Big 5 auditors. Most VC firms probably wish they'd been doing the same thing 2 years ago. But anyway, so a lot of that is definitely.
Yeah, there was a lawsuit this week. I can't remember which one it was.
Yes. So So that also is a condition which in itself can be a rate limiting step which could drag the process for a few months.
Right.
Or
So
up to a few months. Yeah.
unless you have completed your audits already.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, exactly. So you need to have your numbers in place, whereas in a 1 million round, it's typically, there's a lot about thesis, there's a lot of founder reference checks. The founder reference checks typically happen at every stage, but at some point they become more hygienic and just completing it and making sure there's no red flags. Whereas in the early days, a 1 million round, they actually become confirmatory. They become part of your thesis, is that you're finding some ninja skills, some superpowers, all these terms that we VCs use in order to describe what we're looking for is a person that has a certain set of spikes that would translate into execution that early in the business. So they're the weighting tilts much more towards that than towards numbers, because oftentimes at that round, you're not necessarily having a lot of numbers just yet. So it's a lot about thesis at that point. It's a lot about markets, a lot about competition. The later rounds, the markets oftentimes will have been confirmed, and you will be talking to investors who have gained certain comfort with the market, also because they might have tracked you for a while. They might have talked to a lot of your existing investors. They might have talked to incumbents in the market. They've done usually a lot of outside in homework at that specific stage of your business, so that the market becomes less of a topic. Whereas in the 1 million round in the early days, the market oftentimes is a big topic, right? As is competition, like who could be moving into your space? What's your defensibility? In a 100 million round, the defensibility usually can still be a discussion, but people feel more comfortable accepting certain quick responses on defensibility and then finding some proof in the product or in talking to your customers. Whereas in the early days, because it's a thesis discussion in the 1 million round, you need to have extremely good and logical answers and sort of verifiable answers why you think you will build up defensibility over the next that will hold over the next 10 years.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we've now discussed is that can be, quite normed processes in some ways, although there will always be like local flavors or custom flavors that every VC firm will have. I think experienced founders who've done multiple rounds, they see it's always the same pattern in the core of it. But there is difference whether I'm raising 1 or 10 or 100. But what's the difference actually if I'm raising from a generalist towards if I'm raising from someone that only looks at my vertical, and then specifically someone like us? Like, how are we in our process different?
Would you like me to answer the second question first or the first? Because I think the answers might be quite different.
Oh, okay. Yeah, then perhaps the former first.
Okay, so again, generally speaking, if you put sector-specific funds, generalist funds on the opposite sides. Now, taking an example of a generalist fund, which let's say has no experience with the model or the space that the prospective investee is playing in, it'll probably, so depending on the risk appetite of that generalist or how intrigued they are, that could already reduce the probability to begin with of where they go and how much traction they demand, for example, to get involved, depending on which generalist or the kind of generalist you're speaking with. Or it could start a process where they first need to educate themselves about the model or the space, which could involve them having to speak with a few other market participants, doing more ref checks with prospective customers, industry experts, trying to speak with comparable companies from other geographies or companies with comparable business models, but in other markets and spaces. High quality generalist funds will usually do most of these, if not all of these. If it's a space or a theme that they have previously not invested in. What high quality generalist firms do, if they already have success stories, actually even failures, I should say, why only success stories, but referenceable examples from their portfolio that they have invested in, which are somewhat similar or which they're learnings from, they're usually able to translate it fairly quickly. The extent to which those learnings transfer, it depends a bit. Sometimes you still need to transfer from one geography to the other, one market to the other.
Could be different teams.
Could be different teams, right? Because And truth be told, and it's a fact we often overlook in our excitement for construction tech, it is still a very underrepresented space in the overall VC world. I think it can't be overstated. So if you put yourself in the shoes of a generalist VC, construction tech deal flow is still a relatively small proportion. So the extent to which you can randomly superimpose a model from some other space here, it doesn't work as effectively because you're trying to apply a model from a much larger sample set to a much smaller sample set where the likely failure rate or the likelihood that it's not an appropriate comparison is very high.
Think
And I
about
think
it this way. You're probably talking to an investor, let's say partner and senior investor. I mean, junior investors that they're generally not coming with a lot of experience. But let's say you're talking to a partner, 20 years of experience. That partner every day, 365 a year, needs to look at health tech, biotech, cybersecurity markets,
yeah,
all of like agriculture, nutrition,
gaming,
and now you're coming to me and talking to me about how distributor supply chains in the North Indian market work like. Okay,
yeah,
so literally you're the only business that I'm seeing this year where
yeah,
I actually have to deal with this market. So you have to
yeah,
educate me on everything in
yeah,
that regard. Not because I'm
absolutely,
stupid. I'm a pretty
yeah,
smart person if I'm in
yeah.
that role. But it's because the other 364 days of the year, I'm looking at completely different markets that I also have to understand.
Yeah. Actually, on that note, I guess one related point, a bit of a side note, what I like to always believe in our profession of VC, I think VC is often compared to an art or a science. And I guess it has aspects of both. I like to think of it more as a craft in the sense you you kind of employ your personal signature to what you do, similar to an art. You obviously also have to use methods which hopefully have some sense to them, right? But similar to a craft, you get better the more you do things. Hopefully, you learn from your mistakes, and the repetition and iteration make you more likely to succeed in the future. Assuming, of course, you're learning from your mistakes, you're employing new tech. Whenever it comes along, you're open to learning,
I like that.
right? And I think that also is important to keep in mind in the distinction between generalist VCs or any VC for that matter. I think not all VCs treat it as a craft. I think it's important, whether it's as an individual or as a firm, quite often firms may go too far in one direction to treat it as truly a random art or too specific, too playbooky, too by the books, right? And I think that's where you perhaps lose your ability to build your signature style in a craft, right? Uh, which is hard to do, by the way, in the case of a generalist VC, which doesn't have too much exposure in construction, because you simply don't have the enough of a sample set
Right.
to hone the craft.
Right.
Um, Switching over a bit to the, I guess, most sector-specific funds that we know who play
Okay.
in our space or in adjacent spaces, what I've noticed is there's like this leaning to very heavily lay down a strategic angle early on. And for those of our viewers and listeners who are wondering what that means, it is to establish some sort of commercial or strategic value to other participants, large corporates, for instance, in this ecosystem, which I always think is a bit um, maybe shooting yourself in the foot a little bit. I mean, you perhaps by design aiming for safe-ish outcomes, which sort of satisfy the status quo. I don't know if that's something you have observed as well, Patrick.
I think I've observed it to the degree that it's almost part of the diligence process. Hey, that I have people in my strategic, like my network of strategics that approve of what you're doing, and that gives me conviction that there's a market or there's a problem, there's a willingness to pay, etc. The problem that I have with that is that there's a reason why there's a job like an investor, is the ability to again contextualize the problem, the technological solution, the market, the capital markets next to it, what it takes to do company building. And so if I'm doing this approach of, hey, I have my network of strategics and I'm going to ask what they want, there is a risk that I'm not contextualizing it properly anymore. And I treat it as an outsourcing of my diligence. And especially if I use it in a checkmark type way, which I have seen with specialists, where they say, no. If they don't approve, even if everything else makes sense for me as an investor and I contextualize it, etc., I can't move forward because they don't like it. Like okay, then you're wasting the founder's time, in my opinion. And you're also doing your fund a disservice because it could still end up actually being a fantastic investment. It's just that the people you asked didn't give you a proper context relevant response to it. And so our process to perhaps move the discussion into that final part, we're not relying on any of that. Like we're talking to a lot of experts in diligences, especially when it's a first of a kind model, where we perhaps know the market, but the model is unique, or we know the model, but it's a new market. So for example, Sub-Saharan Africa 1 or 2 years ago for us was a new market, and we had to do a lot of calls to understand it. So we're using that as well, but it's never part of our investor network, and it's actually not a checklist type thing for us. So that I feel is a very big difference between us and perhaps other processes. Something that I also catch serial founders that go with us through a process find unique is that we don't invite founders actually to present to the whole team, but instead work only with the lead partner actually, and then we have internal discussion. And it's usually quite easy for us to do because we're such a tight knit and small but global team. But we never ask the founders to actually spend time to present to everyone, and then it becomes about whatever body language or the pitch didn't sit well. So we actually think if you boil it down to like 30 minutes, you can do an extreme disservice to the entire potential of the company, to the process you're running, etc. We actually, for us, it doesn't work that way, and to concentrate or culminate is probably the right word. Like a great company and a great process, and then say, hey, but if on these 30 minutes you're not on point on Zoom, and the one partner thought like your eyebrow was a little bit too crooky, okay, then for us that process doesn't work. So we're not doing it that way. Where we do rely a lot on, I feel like more than perhaps others in our sector, is great references on the founders. I think we're doing more thesis discussion because we're investing very early. I feel like oftentimes founders have given us the feedback that the thesis discussion, the quality of very specific questions, because we have seen multiple other models, has been quite good. I feel like that is something that founders have appreciated as a difference as well.
Absolutely. I mean, obviously we'll be, I guess, looking at the feedback with rose-tinted glasses, but I would like to believe that is indeed the case.
Yeah. Right. So I guess the summary is, if you're building in generally if you're building in construction tech, most processes in the end look pretty plain vanilla wherever you go. There will be local flavors and nuances, bit more nuance between us and perhaps a generalist, where the weightings are different. For us, it would be a lot about great founder references, thesis discussion. You can skip the market part with us. Usually you can skip the competition part with us. Usually just because we've typically looked at your market and looked at your incumbent competition before. So, we typically get to have a quicker discussion about the tech, the solution, and the thesis than perhaps, you would have with someone who has only like 1 day a year to look at your market.
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. We're nearing the 60-minute mark here. Got 60-hour mark.
We'll probably do a 60-hour one as well eventually.
Yeah, that will be the holiday season.
Yeah. I'm sure.
But so let's do our little tradition here. Like, if you're looking to your calendar for next week, like what's there to look forward to?
I mean, there's a couple of interesting opportunities I'm digging into. Again, something that I must confess I'm not particularly well versed with, but I think you and a few other colleagues of ours are very well informed. Stuff around the timber market.
Oh,
So keen to, I guess, dig in and learn more in what could be an interesting opportunity.
so here comes the smartest question:
Mhm.
timber or lumber?
Oh, I mean, it's timber, but now that you ask this question, my mind is going in different directions on whether something that works for timber could it be applied to lumber and or vice versa.
Get back to me on that.
I will.
Um, in
Well, what's
my
your week looking like?
yeah, actually, I have multiple meetings that I'm really, really looking forward to next week.
Hmm.
I guess the thing I'm looking forward to next week is not so much in my calendar. It's actually a process I'm currently running on a very interesting vertical software infrastructure
Okay.
in the 3D reconstruction space. So think photogrammetry, LiDAR, digital twins,
Hmm.
potentially even nerves or Gaussian splatting. For those of you who want to nerd out with me on that one, you can also find some articles on aecvc.com about
Hmm.
that. But right now I'm looking at a company with I think, amazing founder team that is building vertical infrastructure to allow anyone to build software applications on top of a better database and a better querying language for
Hmm.
3D reconstructed data, point clouds, etc. I'm liking that a lot, and I'm running a process right now together with
Nice.
our colleagues Seb and Ross, and so that's something I'm really enjoying right now as well.
Very cool.
Awesome. So, look, I mean, I'm going to get my notebook out because I need to start collecting now all these German idioms that I'm going to translate for you for our holiday episodes. I
Yeah.
hope you do the same with Bengali and Hindi and
Oh man, I
all
think
the languages you speak.
I'll have to start my preparation right now, dude, to get on that one.
Nice, nice. Well, I mean, I'm going to leave you with this one, Shub. Remember for your weekend that the devil is a squirrel.
I have that one burned into my memory for a good 3, 4 years now, and I absolutely love it, I have to say.
So we'll reveal next time what it means.
Yeah.
All right. Have a happy weekend, Shub.
Happy weekend, sir.